Good morning, Aunt Violet. This is your nephew, Antonio. I just had a 10-day holiday in Bavaria, the southern part of Germany. And I went for a big walk in the mountains. You see that here. I had lots of other adventures, and I wanted to share them all with you in a video letter. So I'm going to probably make it 2 or 3 separate little videos to keep them under hours and hours long. Hope you enjoy this. We're going to start by going to Munich. I only spent about a day in Munich. I stayed there 3 days, but used the other 2 days to see some things in the area around Munich, which I'll show you next. But this is in the center of Munich. It's called St. Michael's Church. Lovely old church on the edge of the center. Quite an amazing interior. Unfortunately, I didn't know when I was there, it's actually the burial place of the kings of Bavaria. So had I known that, I'd have looked for their tombs there inside the church. Anyhow, this is what it looked like. Beautiful place. You're going to find that most of my pictures are of buildings. I didn't take a lot of pictures, and when I do, it's usually architectural references from doing my own work. So that's St. Michael's in Munich. And that's the town hall, very famous town hall in the old center of Munich. The square in front of it was closed off because they were preparing for an event, so I couldn't get up close to it. But it's famous for this tower, and in particular, there's you might call it a giant cuckoo clock. There's an amazing clock on the front of the tower that has these figures that come out and do dances and things. I think they've got a dragon and all kinds of stuff up there. It comes out, and whenever the bells chime the hour, puts on a big show. Fortunately, I have a good zoom lens that allows me to get in there and see things up close. So there's the figures. They were out, but they weren't moving. They were just on display. And that's the cathedral in Munich. It's quite hemmed in by other buildings, so you can't stand back far enough to get a good picture of the whole front. Amazing beautiful high sunlit space. A peculiar thing I find, though, about the German churches, as beautiful as they are, they lack, well, I should say in England more so, and in France to a lesser extent, the churches are full of generation after generation of what the community has done there. So you've got plaques on the wall honoring people. You've got other plaques that are saying thank you for prayers that were fulfilled. You've got all kinds of history of the community. In Germany, they've had such a long history of iconoclasm and tearing down the idols and painting things white and all that. Most of that is gone, and you just have the architecture, but you don't have all of that other stuff left behind by the community. So it's a little different experience, but they're beautiful nonetheless. This is called the King's Square, Koningsplatz in Munich. And at one time, it was sort of the edge of the city. At that time, that was about the 1830s, I think. King Ludwig I, I think, was responsible for this. He decided the city needed a proper entrance gate. So he hired an architect to design this group of 3 buildings. In the middle, we have the gate to the city. The road just goes right around it, but it's called the Gate to the City. And it's in the Greek Doric style, same as the Parthenon in Athens. And then on the right, we have a museum that's done in the Ionic style, and on the left, another museum that's done in the Corinthian style. So it's the 3 important classical styles. It's like a little encyclopedia of classical architecture right there on that square. So, of course, I got crazy taking pictures of it. That's the gate. And that's standing in the porch of the Corinthian building, looking towards the Ionic building, and looking back the other way at the Corinthian building. Amazing, beautiful sculpture. The 2 museums were closed the day I was there, so I will have to go back again another time, I guess. And then this is also in Munich. There's a great big park. It's kind of beat up and looks a little bit shabby, but there's a good reason for that. You see the grass here is all kind of worn out. It's a huge area, and it's used for the Oktoberfest. So it's vast. It's like many football fields in size. And the whole thing gets filled up with people having a great big party every October, so you can understand why the lawns look a little bit worn out. But up above it all, there's this statue of Bavaria here, and then this building wrapping around behind. And it's quite lovely. It contains an open-air walkway. There are busts of famous Bavarians lining the walkway inside. And there's a little detail of it. And here we see some of the busts. Again, unfortunately, it was closed and I couldn't walk up there, but I could get some pictures. Our last place in Munich to visit is the Nymphenburg Palace, which was the home of the kings of Bavaria. And we see it here. It's on the edge of the city. There's a canal that runs from the center of the city out, and then near the edge of the city, it broadens out into a kind of a small lake in front of the palace. And in the back of the palace is a park. And beyond that, it's the countryside. So it's right at the edge. Here I am with the swans getting closer. This center part where I'm using the mouse, 2 rows of arched windows and then some oval windows. That's all one big room, and we'll see that inside. In the old days, if you were important enough, you would arrive by going up these steps into that great room. But tourists, we come in through these arches and go through a back way. You can see through the arches to the park beyond it. And this is looking back where we were just standing, looking back the other way. And now I'm up inside, one level up from the ground, looking out a window towards the park. This is where you first arrive inside the palace when you come in as a tourist. Come in through the ground level up a little servant staircase, and then they drop you into this room here. Quite a beautiful room. The park is off to the left, and the arches on the right side lead to this great room that I was telling you about a moment ago. Now you can see the arched windows and the oval windows up at the top. And there is a ceiling to keep you busy. That's the ceiling of the great room. Looks like they're having quite a party up there. And then going off each side of that great room are suites of rooms. So now I'm heading down one side, and we've got a red room, and a yellow room, and a green room, of course. I really like the German furniture from the beginning of the 1800s, what they call Biedermeier. This is not exactly Biedermeier, but it's very close, very simple, straight lines. They moved away from all the curves of the Baroque and did this beautiful stuff. That's going down the other wing, and you can kind of glimpse on the sides here some tall paintings. These are landscape paintings, and each painting shows a castle or palace that's owned by the Bavarian royal family, or was owned by the Bavarian royal family. That's an example of one of them. This was an interesting room. King Ludwig I of Bavaria would have been, I think, the 1820s to 1840s. He had shall we say, he had a soft spot for beautiful ladies. So he had this thing where whenever he would see one woman that he thought was particularly beautiful, he would hire the court painter to paint her portrait. And her portrait would be placed in this room. And then when there were important visitors, like state visitors, like ambassadors from other countries and all coming there, he would make sure that they would pass through this room so that he could show them how beautiful the women were in Bavaria. Now, they're not all Bavarian, but most of them are. There were a few English women that visited the court, English nobility that came through and visited the court, and they got painted. And then he had an actress girlfriend for a time. That was a big scandal because he was married. And her painting is on the upper right here, but it's a little too dark to see. Her name was Lola Montez. Now, there was a 20th century actress by the same name, so it's not that person, of course. And then this one's my favorite. This was a young woman named Helen Sedlmayr. and she was the daughter of the baker who delivered bread to the palace. And she and the king got very interested in each other for a time. Again, it was not possible. Kings don't marry bakers' daughters. But he did introduce her into the court, and she eventually married a soldier that was in the king's retinue, up and coming soldier. So that was like a step up in the social ladder for her, and they were happily married. She ended up having 10 children, and her survivors, her descendants, exist today. This is a fun little thing. This is a ceramic wood stove, a ceramic fireplace. It's built into a kind of cubby hole in the wall. And when you don't need to use it, you can close this door over it, and the door is paneled to match the wall, so it just looks like wall. But when you want to warm the room up, now I think you get at this one from behind. There's probably a servant's passage behind this, and you can put the fuel in the bottom and then light it, and all of this ceramic will warm up from the fuel. And then there's a chimney flue going off the back of this behind the wall and up where we don't see it to get rid of the smoke. These ceramic wood stoves are really a nice, comfortable, gentle heat. They don't get too hot. And this is a first glimpse of the park. It's a long avenue, alleyway that runs all the way down to the far end where there's a big fountain. There's one fountain in the middle here, and then in the far distance there's another one, and we'll see pictures of that. There's woods on each side, and there's various smaller buildings in the woods that we'll visit also. The big fountain at the end is right where my mouse is. I was just standing on the terrace up there taking those pictures. And now we're going to take a walk through the park. They have greenhouses somewhere nearby, and they grow all their flowers in the greenhouses and then set them out. So the day I was there, they had taken out the early spring flowers, and they were just getting ready to put the later spring flowers in, but the flower beds were all empty the day I was there. This is called the Amalienburg Pavilion, and it's a single story. Well, it's got rooms, servants' rooms in the attic, but it's basically a single story mini palace. It was a hunting lodge. When they would go hunting, then they would come back here to relax afterwards, and it also had a beautiful, luxurious kitchen where they would prepare their own food. I expect with the help of servants, but they were actually doing their own food, cooking the pheasants that they had shot that day or whatever. So this is the Amalienburg. It's got an exquisite room inside that we'll see. This is the garden side. It's got this part that sticks out here. This is a circular room with like 8 arches inside. 3 of the arches lead to these windows, and then the other 5 have mirrored panels in them to make it look like windows. It's quite an amazing effect. We're going to go in the door on the right, make our way around, and come out on the door on the left, which is the kitchen. This room was all painted up to look like a piece of blue and white porcelain. Where that guy is standing, that's the circular room that's at the center of the whole building, and we'll get through there in a moment. But first we'll pass through this amazing bedroom. This is the circular room. These are the windows, these are the mirrors on the left, and then the windows out to the garden on the right. And in the kitchen, we find this beautiful tile. Everything is tiled. It's an amazing display of beautiful tile work. The lowest part of the wall is not tiled, but it's painted like this to kind of look like tile. And in the woods are also these much simpler buildings, which are homes for the caretakers of the woods. They still do some logging in the forest there to remove the aging trees and replace them with new ones. They also have machinery. The building in the back here is a pump house that brings the water up to a high point, which is, we don't see it here, but it's on the left, and in a canal, and then the water goes from there down to the various canals, fountains, and lakes. So there are people living there, taking care of all this stuff. That there's the pump house. But I just like the architecture. It's very simple, but very cozy looking. Somebody's home. And we had a goose with 2 goslings. And then once you get really deep into the woods, you encounter Pan. This is a building called Bathhouse, and it contains a big pool and I think a couple of small heated pools as well. I didn't go inside. I've been inside this place before, and I had too many other things I wanted to see this day, so I didn't go inside the bathhouse, but it's set on this beautiful lake. And at the other end of the lake is this pavilion here. That's the bathhouse, as seen from that pavilion. The park of the castle's open all the time, so people in the town just wander through it like it's their neighborhood park. Sit and read a book on the steps, you know. And that's the fountain at the far end, opposite the opposite end of the canal from the palace. standing by the side of the fountain looking back towards the palace, but I'm using my zoom lens to bring it up a little bit closer. This is more like what it looks like when you're actually standing there. This little birdhouse is tucked into a hornbeam hedge. Valentina and I have planted a hornbeam hedge in our garden, and so I've been noticing them in other places, and then I saw this little birdhouse. I want to make something like this summer and put 2 or 3 of them out. Excuse me, I said birdhouse. It's a bird feeder. And this here is the hornbeam. This is called the Pagodenburg, the Pagoda Pavilion. And let me back up. It's tiny, it's small, it's like small house size. It's got just one room on the ground floor, which has got an octagon shape. And then off of 4 sides of the octagon are 4 alcoves. They're not big enough to be called rooms. They're maybe 8 feet square. One is the entry, and then 2 of them are like little sitting areas. And then the final one is a staircase going up. And that's inside that octagon room. One of the alcoves. And it's all covered with this beautiful blue and white tile. Upstairs, the octagon is cut in half, and it's 2 bedrooms. So each bedroom has another little alcove space off of it. One of the bedrooms, this one here, is designed to look like the inside of an elaborate Chinese box. And that's the other bedroom. I took this picture because I liked the effect of seeing the balcony rail, the iron balcony with all of its curlicues, contrasted by the straight lines of the wood frame of the window, and then also by all the beautiful trees behind it. That's the outside of that same window. And then this building is called the Hermitage, and it was a chapel and a library. The chapel was all done up to look like a grotto. It's above ground, it's not really a cave, but it was kind of cave-like, the effect. That's the surface of the walls. And this is the library part. There's a sort of window with no glass that looks from the library into the chapel. And now we're back at the front of the palace. There's a ring of buildings in front of the palace. It creates a kind of giant court, and they were created to house various institutions that the government runs that are sort of on display. One of these was a porcelain factory that was set up to compete with the other German and French porcelain makers. And so one of the buildings served as a kind of showroom for their porcelain factory. Here's one of the pieces out in front. And this is an example of what some of those buildings look like that form that front court. The next place we're going to go is a village called Utting on the Lake Ammer, Utting am Ammersee. I wanted to go there because I read about a house from, I think, the 1890s, 1880s, like a very traditional style, substantial German house that was built by a couple of artists, a husband and wife, and you couldn't go inside. So it's a chance to see what a sort of upper middle class German home looked like at that time. Now this isn't the house itself, this is walking through the village here, the village of Utting. There's all kinds of wonderful, quirky little buildings, little houses scattered around the village. This one's designed to look like a miniature castle. That's the lake. I'm sure when it was 1880s, it was probably just a quiet little village off in the middle of nowhere, but it's close enough to Munich, it's only about half an hour away, that it's close enough that it's become like a resort for Munich. It's really a beautiful spot. Everybody comes there. It was like the first day of spring. It felt like the first day of spring. And, you know, the first chance to go outside and wear a short-sleeved shirt and get some sunshine. The place was just overrun with people out on the water. And this is the gates to the house. The name of this couple was Matthias and Anna-Sophie Gasteiger. The gate itself, or these figures, these animal figures, were carved by Matthias Gasteiger, who was, I guess, a very famous sculptor at the time. There's a little creek that runs through the property, and then the house sits like at one edge of the creek, and the other side is on a field, a beautiful meadow. So here we see the creek on the left and the meadow on the right, and we get a little glimpse of the house and the lake in the distance. You have to cross over the creek to get to the house. And Anna-Sophie was a painter, so they had a lot of her paintings on display inside the house. Unfortunately, they didn't have very many of his sculptures, but it was beautiful to see the paintings. This little still life has a figure in it, a little green figurine that was one of his sculptures, and that we'll see in a moment. The painting on the left is actually the house that we're in right now. And that's that funny little green figure. The entrance hall of the house, it has one of those ceramic stoves like we saw at the palace, where the whole ceramic thing gets warmed up by the flames, or by the fire inside. Beautiful entry room with these dark wood paneling and dark wood floor, contrasted against the white plaster. And this is the main sitting room of the house, a very elegant room, full of beautiful furniture too. All these paintings are by her. These doors lead out to the garden. We'll see that from the outside in a moment. And that's one of his sculptures. This is outside. That's the door that we were just looking at that leads from that main sitting room. The entrance to the house is right here. And then I didn't go upstairs. It's not open to the public. I expect the bedrooms are upstairs. All over Bavaria, they're doing a wonderful thing. They're turning all of their lawns into meadows. And they're doing it very carefully and systematically so that there's a full biodiversity of meadow plants, which also encourages all kinds of different insects. So this is all really important for the environment and making sure that we've got bees to pollinate the crops and all that. So they just simply come in and mow only pathways through the meadows. That way it's easy to walk through them, but they don't mow everything. Now I'm going to head back to the train station and go to our next stop. So we're just going to see a few of the other beautiful houses in the village. That's the lake, and there's that funny little castle. This is a spot on the lake where they've got a restaurant and you can rent kayaks and bicycles and lots of happy people there. This is what you see from the train when you're going from Munich to Utting. Typical countryside. Riding the train to Utting, I went past this out the train window, and we're seeing it from the train window right here. I thought, oh, I want to stop and see that. I wonder what it is. So I gave myself an extra hour coming back from Utting to Munich. I stopped and got off at the little train station there, a little village, and it worked out really well because the train's running frequently, so I could hop off the train, see the village, and then get back on another one an hour or two later. It's called St. Otillien, and it turns out it's mostly a Benedictine monastery and convent, and then there's only a little bit of a village that grew up around it, but primarily monastery. This was a little house right there next to the train station, which was just a single track. The monastery had been from its founding a hospital as well. During the Second World War, it was used as a hospital by the German army, and then when they were defeated, the Americans controlled this part of Germany. They converted the hospital over to serve the survivors of the concentration camps. There was one camp not too far from here, near Munich, called Dachau, and they brought the survivors from Dachau to this place and to a couple of other places nearby to help them recover. Here and there throughout the village there were signboards giving a bit of the history with their reminiscences and letters people had written, things like that. There was a service going on in the church when I was there, so I only just stepped inside the doors, but I didn't walk around inside the church. It had the most amazing set of bells, and they were playing the bells while I was there. I'm going to find a way to work that recording into this little video for you. I liked the effect of the dappled shadows from the trees against this door, where the amazing iron hinges of this door are made to look like flowers and grapes and leaves and all. So we've got the shadows of real tree leaves against a door that's made to look like leaves. This little bit of metal up on the top there, that's to keep snow from sliding off the roof in the wintertime, so people walking below don't end up under avalanches of snow. Not a problem we have in our part of California. And there's an owl watching us. On the other side of the arch facing the owl is a squirrel. So the next place we're going to go is a town about an hour north of Munich called Regensburg, which is on the Danube River, and there's a very famous monument nearby, which we're going to take the boat down the river to, or I should say up the river, to the monument. So here we are in the town of Regensburg. There's some old town walls, and this was also built by the Bavarian kings, a small castle overlooking the water. This is the town. This was an old ancient Roman period gateway that was part of the original old city that was first built by the ancient Romans, and it's been incorporated into this building here. The river is off to our right, but there's one group of buildings between us and the river. And that's the cathedral. This, you can see that it's currently under restoration, and you can see this light area here is part of the tower that's already been restored. Of course, they always say what they can, but sometimes some of the sculptures are so weather beaten that they just have to be replaced. So they actually had a little stone yard like next to the church there where they were doing the stonework. This is a brand new piece of stone that they've carved to replace one that's up on the tower somewhere. And they had it down on the ground so you could see it up close. I thought it was quite magnificent. I think it's really wonderful that there are people still able to do these same crafts. And this is inside. This is where the boat takes off. We'll be on it in a moment. Looking back towards the cathedral from the boat landing. Views from the river. Getting ready to depart. And we're off and away on the boat. First we've got to get through the city, and then there's a little bit of industrial around the edges, and then finally into the open countryside. The boat ride was about a half an hour, 40 minutes. And this is our destination, Walhalla. Yes, Walhalla, you heard that right. This is the heaven of the ancient German gods. Before Christianity arrived in Germany, this is where the gods lived. You've probably heard of Valhalla. Anyway, this is a wonderful monument to the heroes of the German world. King Ludwig I, back in the 1830s, commissioned a great architect named Leo von Klenz. He was probably one of the most knowledgeable about the ancient Greek style. And the idea was to build a monument to German-speaking heroes, but heroes included artists, music composers, painters. It also included philosophers and playwrights, and also politicians and kings and generals. So find them all there, men and women, both. Von Klenz's idea was that people would arrive by the river, and then they would walk from the river on a pathway all the way up, and that's what we're going to do. Once you're off the boat, you walk through a simple little stone path under the trees, gradually emerging into this meadow where there are sheep grazing. It was supposed to be kind of a pilgrimage. It was his idea, was there was a kind of a pilgrimage, but also the climbing from the river to the top was supposed to be like a ceremony or a symbol of people's efforts to improve themselves and become heroes. So there's a lot of effort involved in climbing up to the top here. You start out in the trees, and then you work your way out into the meadows, and then finally you start up the stairs. And as you get higher, you can see farther and farther, a metaphor no doubt. There are also landings along the way where you can stop and rest before you embark on the next phase in your journey. So we're higher still, looking down over the Danube, and we see this area here. This is something you see a lot. It's a piece of land that's been set aside so that people who don't have gardens, like people who live in apartments in the town, they can rent one of these small bits of land and make their own little garden there. It could be vegetables, it could be flowers, and they usually have a little garden shed on it as well. It's a great way for apartment dwellers to have a bit of green. And we finally make it to the top and go inside, and it's this amazing room lined with the busts of all of the German heroes. He was specific about German language heroes, so you'll also have people from other countries like Austria and what's now the Czech Republic. This is Sophie Scholl. She was a hero of World War II, a young woman, a student at university who objected to what the Nazis were doing and started a movement against it, which very rapidly spread through the university where she was a student, much to the dismay of the local authorities, who promptly arrested her, put her on trial, and killed her. So, beginning of the resistance in Germany. And here we have Johannes Brahms, one of the great composers. King Frederick II, who was one of the most successful kings of, I think he was I'm not sure if he was King of Prussia. Anyway, quite a character. He also played the flute and wrote music, but he's remembered here for being a king. And there is Fame herself, holding the laurel wreaths with which she crowns these heroes. And my favorite, Beethoven. And me with Beethoven. That's King Ludwig I there, looking out over his companions. Well, that's the end of the first part of my trip. I'm going to end the video here and make another video with the next part of my trip. I'll see if it fits into one more video or if I need to go to two. But we will be going next down to the village of Oberammergau to see the Passion Play. So hopefully I can get that next video put together in the next few days. Take care, Violet. I hope you're doing well. Think of you every day. Bye-bye.